Something unusual is happening in North America, and most people haven't noticed it yet. While the world is busy watching elections, conflicts, and economic headlines, a quiet but powerful shift may already be underway. A single port deal in Canada is now raising serious questions about the future of trade across the entire continent. Some analysts believe it could change how billions of dollars in goods move between countries. Others think it could slowly reshape the balance of economic influence between Canada and the United States. In the center of this story is a place most people rarely think about, the Port of Halifax. Now, at first glance, this might sound like just another infrastructure story. Ports get upgrades all the time, governments sign development deals every year. But this situation is different, because when major global shipping routes begin shifting, the ripple effects can reach far beyond a single city or even a single country. In fact, some experts say control over key ports today is almost like control over highways in the early days of the automobile industry. Whoever builds the fastest, most efficient routes eventually attracts the most traffic. And in the world of global trade, traffic means money, influence, and long-term power. But before we break down what is really happening here, take a quick second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you enjoy stories about global economics, trade power, and the hidden strategies shaping the world, you're going to like what we do here on the Maple Doctrine. This channel is all about looking beyond the headlines and understanding the deeper moves that most people miss. And your support helps us continue bringing you these deep dives. Now let's get back to Halifax. For decades, the Port of Halifax has been one of Canada's most important trade gateways. Located on the Atlantic coast, it has something that many ports simply don't have: deep natural waters that allow some of the world's largest cargo ships to dock easily. That alone makes it valuable. But its real advantage is geography. Halifax sits closer to Europe than many other major North American ports. That means ships crossing the Atlantic can reach Halifax faster, unload cargo quickly, and then send those goods across rail and road networks into the rest of Canada and even the United States. In the world of logistics, saving even a few hours can translate into millions of dollars over time. Because of this, Halifax has always been important. But recently, something bigger has started to happen. Investments, partnerships, and infrastructure discussions surrounding the port have started attracting new global attention. Businesses and analysts are beginning to see Halifax not just as a regional port, but as a strategic gateway into North America. And whenever a new gateway opens in global trade, it naturally creates competition. For many years, American ports handled a huge share of international cargo entering the continent. From the East Coast to the West Coast, the United States built an enormous logistics network designed to move goods quickly into major markets. But global trade is never static. Routes evolve, investments shift, and new opportunities emerge. That's why some observers are now watching Canada very closely. If Canadian ports like Halifax continue expanding and attracting more global shipping traffic, the flow of goods across North America could slowly begin to diversify. Instead of relying heavily on a few traditional entry points, companies may start exploring alternative routes that offer speed, efficiency, and stability. And this is where things become particularly interesting. Because trade routes are not just about cargo containers. They influence entire industries. When a port grows, it creates jobs, infrastructure development, transportation contracts, and investment opportunities. Rail networks expand. Warehouses appear. Logistics companies move in. Entire economic ecosystems start forming around these hubs. So when governments and investors sign deals related to ports, they are not just thinking about ships arriving at docks. They are thinking about the next 20 or 30 years of economic growth. Naturally, developments like this often attract political attention as well. Whenever large infrastructure projects begin shifting economic advantages, leaders and policymakers start asking questions. How will this affect supply chains? Could it change trade negotiations in the future? Will certain regions gain more influence over global commerce? These questions are especially important right now because global supply chains are already changing. Over the past few years, companies around the world have started rethinking how and where they move their products. Instead of relying on a single route or single partner, businesses are looking for flexibility. They want multiple gateways into major markets. And when that happens, new strategic locations suddenly become extremely valuable. Ports that once operated quietly in the background can suddenly move to the center of global trade discussions. Investors notice them, governments prioritize them, shipping companies begin adjusting their routes, and slowly, the map of international commerce begins to change. Which brings us back to Halifax. Because the developments happening there right now may seem small on the surface, a deal here, an infrastructure investment there. But when you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, some analysts believe we might be witnessing the early stages of something much larger. A shift that could influence how goods move between continents, a shift that could create new economic opportunities for Canada, and a shift that may force other countries to rethink their own trade strategies. But the real story behind this situation goes even deeper, because the decisions being made today around Halifax could have consequences that stretch far beyond one port and far beyond one country. And once you see the full picture, the entire situation becomes much more fascinating than it first appears. But the deeper you look into this story, the more interesting it becomes. Because what is happening around Halifax is not just about a single port expansion or a normal trade investment. It may actually reflect a much bigger shift in how global trade routes are evolving. Over the last decade, international shipping has gone through massive changes. Cargo ships are becoming larger than ever before. Supply chains are becoming more complex. And companies are constantly searching for faster and safer routes to move goods across continents. In this environment, the importance of strategic ports has grown dramatically. Think about it this way. Every product you see in stores, electronics, clothing, machinery, even food, likely traveled thousands of miles before reaching consumers. And almost all of those products pass through ports at some point. Ports are like the beating heart of global trade. When they grow stronger, entire economies around them grow as well. That is exactly why Halifax has started attracting attention from global investors and logistics companies. Its natural deep harbor, combined with modern rail connections into the rest of Canada and the United States, makes it one of the most efficient entry points on the Atlantic side of North America. For shipping companies crossing the ocean, saving even one day of travel time can translate into enormous cost savings over the long run. But there is another reason why some analysts believe Halifax is becoming more important. Global supply chains are slowly diversifying. For many years, businesses relied heavily on a few major ports and transportation corridors. But events over the past several years, economic disruptions, supply chain delays, and geopolitical tensions have forced companies to rethink that strategy. Instead of depending on one route, they now prefer multiple entry points into major markets. That shift is creating opportunities for ports that were once considered secondary hubs. Halifax is one of them. With new investments and infrastructure improvements, the port has the potential to handle more cargo, larger ships, and faster distribution across North America. Rail lines connecting Halifax to inland cities allow goods to move quickly toward major economic centers, including parts of the United States. And when companies notice that kind of efficiency, they start paying attention. Shipping companies analyze routes carefully. They calculate fuel costs, travel time, congestion at ports, and transportation fees. If a route becomes faster or cheaper, cargo can quickly begin shifting in that direction. Over time, even a small percentage change in shipping traffic can mean billions of dollars moving through a different gateway. This is why developments like the Halifax deal sometimes trigger wider discussions in political and economic circles. Because trade routes are not just business decisions, they can also carry strategic importance. When a port grows into a major international hub, it attracts more than cargo ships. It attracts investment, technology, infrastructure projects, and long-term partnerships between countries. Governments often view these projects as opportunities to strengthen their economic position on the global stage. In Canada's case, expanding trade infrastructure can help the country connect more directly with international markets. Europe, Asia, and other regions are constantly looking for reliable entry points into North America. Ports that offer stability, efficiency, and strong transportation networks naturally become attractive options. And that brings us to the broader conversation that has started gaining attention among analysts. Could Canada be positioning itself to play a bigger role in global trade logistics? Some experts believe the country's geographic location gives it unique advantages. Sitting between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, Canada has access to shipping routes connecting Europe, Asia, and the United States. If infrastructure continues improving, Canadian ports could handle a larger share of international cargo entering the continent. Of course, none of this means the United States suddenly loses its importance in global trade. The American economy remains one of the largest and most powerful in the world, with enormous logistics networks already in place. But global trade is rarely controlled by only one route or one country. Instead, it evolves through competition, innovation, and strategic investments. And that competition often pushes countries to develop stronger infrastructure. Whenever a port begins expanding its capabilities, neighboring regions start analyzing the long-term impact. Will shipping companies redirect more cargo there? Could certain industries move closer to the port to reduce transportation costs? Might new rail lines, warehouses, or manufacturing hubs appear nearby? These are the kinds of questions economists and policymakers ask when they evaluate infrastructure projects. But here is where the story becomes even more intriguing. Because global trade today is not just about efficiency, it is also about resilience. Companies now want supply chains that can survive disruptions. They want alternative routes in case one corridor becomes congested or unstable. Ports that offer reliability, political stability, and modern infrastructure become extremely valuable in this environment. Halifax checks many of those boxes. It operates in a politically stable country. It connects directly to rail networks that move cargo deep into North America. And it sits on one of the shortest shipping paths between Europe and the continent. When you combine those factors, the port begins to look less like a regional hub and more like a strategic gateway. And when gateways become more important, global attention follows. Investors start funding expansions. Governments prioritize logistics upgrades. Shipping companies explore new partnerships. Slowly but steadily, the influence of that location grows, which leads to an even bigger question that analysts are now debating. If Halifax continues expanding and attracting international cargo traffic, could it gradually reshape certain trade patterns across the Atlantic? Could it become one of the primary entry points for goods traveling between Europe and North America? And if that happens, what ripple effects might follow for ports, industries, and economic strategies across the region? Those questions are exactly why this story has started generating so much discussion behind the scenes, because sometimes the most important economic shifts don't happen through dramatic announcements or breaking headlines. Sometimes they happen quietly, through infrastructure, shipping routes, and long-term planning. And as we move toward the final part of this story, we will look at the bigger strategic picture and why some observers believe the decisions being made around Halifax today could influence the future of North American trade in ways most people still haven't realized. Now, when you step back and look at the entire picture, the situation becomes much more fascinating than it first appeared, because what is happening around Halifax is not just a local development story, it reflects something much bigger that is quietly shaping the future of global trade. For decades, the structure of international commerce remained relatively predictable. Major cargo flows followed the same established routes. Large ports in the United States, Europe, and Asia handled the majority of shipments, and companies built their supply chains around those hubs. But the world economy today is changing faster than ever. New technologies are transforming logistics. Political tensions are influencing trade partnerships. And businesses are constantly searching for safer, faster, and more reliable ways to move goods across continents. In this new environment, flexibility has become extremely valuable. Companies no longer want to depend on just one shipping route or one port. They want multiple options, multiple partners, and multiple entry points into important markets. That strategy protects them from disruptions, delays, and unexpected political changes. And that is exactly why places like Halifax are starting to gain more attention. A port that once operated quietly in the background is now being viewed through a very different lens. Investors see opportunity, shipping companies see efficiency, governments see long-term economic potential. But the real story here is not just about ships arriving at a dock, it's about what happens after those ships arrive. When cargo begins flowing through a port at a larger scale, entire industries start forming around it. Warehouses expand, rail networks become busier, logistics companies move closer to the port, technology systems are upgraded to handle higher volumes of trade. Over time, these developments create powerful economic ecosystems. Cities grow around major ports. Jobs are created across transportation, manufacturing, and services. Businesses build supply chains designed specifically to take advantage of that gateway. This is why infrastructure investments often have effects that last for decades. The decisions made today about ports, railways, and logistics hubs can shape economic growth for an entire generation. And in Canada's case, strengthening Atlantic trade gateways could offer an opportunity to expand the country's role in international commerce. With direct connections to European markets and strong rail links into the North American interior, Halifax has the potential to serve as a bridge between continents. The possibility is exactly what analysts are paying attention to. Because when trade routes evolve, economic influence can evolve with them. Again, this does not mean the United States suddenly loses its position in global trade. The American logistics network is enormous, and its ports remain among the busiest in the world. But global commerce rarely stands still. New routes emerge, new partnerships develop, and new infrastructure projects reshape how goods move across the planet. Competition, innovation, and investment constantly push the system forward. And sometimes, the most important changes begin quietly, far away from headlines and political debates. A new logistics agreement, an infrastructure expansion, a strategic port investment. Each of these steps may look small on its own, but over time, they can slowly redirect the flow of trade. Which brings us back to the bigger question behind this entire story. Are we watching the early stages of a broader shift in North American trade logistics? Could Canadian ports begin attracting a larger share of transatlantic shipping traffic? Could global companies see Halifax as an efficient alternative gateway into the continent? And if that happens, how might transportation networks and supply chains evolve in response? Right now, those questions are still open, but one thing is certain. Global trade is entering a new era where adaptability and strategic infrastructure matter more than ever before. Countries that invest early in logistics, transportation, and supply chain efficiency often position themselves for long-term advantages. And the ports that successfully connect international markets with strong inland networks can become powerful economic engines for decades. That is why analysts, investors, and policymakers are watching developments like this so closely. Because the true importance of a port is not just measured in ships or cargo containers, it is measured in influence. Influence over trade routes, influence over supply chains, and influence over the economic connections that tie countries together. And sometimes the most interesting part of these stories is realizing that the biggest shifts often happen slowly, almost invisibly, until suddenly everyone begins to notice the change. If you found this breakdown interesting, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the Maple Doctrine for more deep dives into global economics, trade strategy, and the hidden forces shaping the future of North America. And now I'm curious about your opinion. Do you think ports like Halifax could become major gateways for global trade in the coming years? Or do you believe the traditional shipping routes will remain dominant? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective always adds to the conversation. And if you think someone else would find this story interesting, share this video with them as well. Because sometimes the most important changes in the world economy are the ones that happen quietly, long before the headlines catch up.